Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams D podcast where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today we are here with two brand new reviews for two brand new records that just so happen to be released by, wouldn't you know it, two of my favorite bands in the whole world in 1 week. We are officially celebrating the return of Boards of Canada, one of the big three of IDM, one of this channel's favorite bands, and this is their first album in 13 fucking years since Tomorrow's Harvest, as well as a new album from post-rock, heavy psych, stoner metal, prog rock, doom metal, psych rock, whatever the fuck you want to call them at any given moment. Elder is back with their first album in 4 years, Through Zero. We're going to talk about Elder here first. And Elder, this is the best way to put it with this band, man. This is the most Jake sounding band of all time. When
Oh
you
yeah.
think about all the things that you associate with me, with music, if you mashed it all together, it's gonna look a little something like Elder. And for those of you who don't know about this band, they are probably one of the biggest bands in this particular modern psych rock and stoner metal scene, which is primarily kind of how I would classify them. Ever since 2011's Dead Roots Stirring, an absolute monolithic masterpiece, in my opinion. These guys, not only have they never missed, they really just have never, ever once threatened to disappoint me. Dead Root Stirring is a masterpiece, and 2015's Lore, 2017's Reflections of a Floating World, those are too. In fact, Reflections of a Floating World is one of my favorite albums in the entire world. Perfect, stone cold perfect record. And their album in 2022, we got to mention on our most overlooked albums of the year video. Innate Passage was them kind of delving further into some space rock influences. And now we have their new album, Through Zero. And the best way I can sell this band to the uninitiated is that these guys carry the torch that was left by Black Sabbath's prog era. Basically, right before Ozzy left the band, back when they were in their heyday, particularly in the Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage era, aka my personal favorite era of the band. And basically, it takes the combination of psych rock, stoner rock, doom metal, and progressive rock and just kind of takes these sounds even further. And it feels like they kind of explore a different facet of their genre combinations on every single record. And on 2022's Innate Passage, we had something that was a little bit cleaner when it embraced that space rock sound. And honestly, I loved that album. It was fantastic. It showed a new side of them that I wasn't particularly super used to. It was probably the most they had sounded like 2015's Lore since that album. So I appreciated it, but it wasn't the full-blown definitive masterpiece that the sort of previous records were. Though I must confess, 2026's Through Zero here kind of picks up where we left off on that record, and we continue in similarly impressive fashion on this album. So, Jen, what was it like to listen to this band and this album that is so very stereotypically me? Because I believe, yeah, this is the first official time we've been able to talk about this band on this show. Yay for me.
All right. It's been a long year of metal discovery on my part,
Yeah.
and this is no exception. As soon as I hit play on this album, I understood why you enjoy this band. The stoner rock approach to song composition with the chuggy drum and bass over these shrieking, reverberating guitars as we're kind of brought in to the start of this song, Sigil to Ruin. The sludginess of this band is something that I really ended up latching onto, particularly on this song,
Hmm.
as a way to really get into their sound and their lyricism. Because similar to the Neurosis record that we talked about earlier this year, this is a climate apocalypse narrative
Hmm.
being woven together through all these different tracks. And it can sound very melancholic but accepting on songs like Sigil to Ruin, or you can have the title track Through Zero, which starts out in a much more melancholic, depressed place as it's talking about this sort of end of Evangelion singularity event where all of life
Yeah.
coalesces into a single moment, and it all coalesces in this great instrumental climax. Again, great sludge, complemented by this very soft but very loud guitar riff in the front of the mix that does a lot to complement the vocals. So, this is par for the course of the metal albums that we've been talking about so far this year.
Hmm.
What separates this one apart from the rest for me has been, well, one, just that all of these tracks function as big, sweeping, epic moments. There's not a song on here that's shorter than 5 minutes. Most of them are 8 minutes and longer.
Hmm.
So big, sweeping instrumental statements happening here create a very nihilistic record that's all lyrically focused on the idea of mass death, which can be very oppressive. But because the band is clearly having so much fun and the instrumentation is very precise and very groovy, I like the
Yeah.
groove on this, and that's what
Mm.
carries me forward through the kind of sullen nature of its lyricism.
Yeah, I get that. In fact, I think you could say that there is a lot of shared thematic DNA between the albums that we are reviewing this week.
Yeah.
But I love how you describe them as precise, because that's exactly how I would describe them as well. Because when you have bands that deal in this psychedelic and heavy psych sound, and especially when you have, instrumentation that's not necessarily like the cleanest in the whole world, they kind of go back and forth in terms of production styles. This is a notably kind of a mixed effort in terms of like blending stuff that sounds a little bit crunchier and sludgier with stuff that's a little bit more on the hi-fi side, but I overall think they strike the balance super well. But in this scene, and with this sound, it's so very easy to become kind of amorphous, both sonically and structurally, and it tends to be where bands like this lose themselves. But Elder always anchor themselves to their instincts so tightly. They're so careful when it comes to things like song construction. They are, at the end of the day, still a prog rock band, and they are progressive mostly in structure. These are all songs that, as you said, are these big, multi-sweeping epics. And, from the start of it, Sigil to Ruin, like, I see a more than 10-minute long Elder song on the track list ahead of time, and I'm like already about to pitch a tent. Like I'm already excited, and this basically gives you everything you could possibly want out of an Elder opening track. These guys really know how to blow the fucking doors down. And I love, man, frontman Nicholas DeSalvo is just an absolute like once in a generation talent when it comes to both like guitar composition, his sort of power as a vocalist in this band, and the synthesizer, which has become more and more prominent of an element in this band's sound as the years have gone on. And I must confess, I do also really, really like that this dirtier kind of production style is being blended with such heavy synth use on this album. It creates a really fascinating kind of tonal clash that I really, really like. That again reminds me of that Neurosis album from earlier in the year, which is a good thing considering that's one of the best albums of the year. But I mean, this thing is massive. It's 6 songs, but it's like almost an hour long. So it's gonna occupy a decent chunk of your brain space while you're listening to it. And really, the only like complaint as a huge, huge fan of this band that I even have is really structurally, not in the songs themselves, but in the album itself, it is a bit strange that they end it on the shortest song here, the almost 6 minute long Blighted Age, which is good and I think, accomplishes ending this album in a satisfactory way, maybe for the narrative on display, kind of achieving some sort of peace or equilibrium here. And I feel like it's reflected very well in the sound too. But at the same time, as like a musical come down from what came before it, it's a bit of a peculiar choice. And as much as I do really dig every single song on here, I must admit that the highs compared to the relative lows, there's not an insubstantial difference in between these moments because, I mean, Sigil Ruin is just, again, total fucking barn burner. I also want to shout out Strata, the kind of mid-album highlight for me, which has these gorgeous colorful synth passages and a lot of the guitar work on this album when it's not just doing straight riffage does these really colorful arpeggiations that are just like this is why this band are still as successful as they are is because they take a sound that's really like again big and overwhelming and kind of like heady and stuff and it adds these really definitive textural ideas that a lot of people just don't play with. And I really love that about this song. I think it's basically as good as the opener. And I mean, again, Capture and Release is also similarly fantastic. Again, Through Zero, bit of a weird moment that kind of feels like it drags its feet just a tiny bit compared to like the literal perfection that's kind of on either side of it. And I do really dig Sight Unseen. It is a very good song, but it does again lag a bit behind the front half of this album in terms of like staggering consistency. But these are the kind of flaws that arise from you doing what you do about as well as anybody does it. So anytime you're not up to the highest possible standard, you might fall just a tiny bit short. But again, that's only because I have a particularly discerning ear when it comes to this band. I really, really can't recommend this enough as somebody who wants this band to get new listeners and knows that the metal community at large kind of values a sound like this being as big as it is because a lot of people try to mimic this. A lot of people try to do what Elder do, and they just can't really nail that balance. They can't nail that equilibrium in the same way. They can't balance tone and sound and genre in as dexterous as a way as this band manages to. And that ends up making them fade or having to change their sound beyond recognition. But I think there's a reason this band have stuck around as long as they have. And I think that right now would be a good time to get into them, considering their last two records are probably their two most accessible, and conversely, what I would determine to be their two weakest. So if you attacked the newer ones and listened to them and dig those, you have a backlog that is just, you're going to be chomping at the bit at, and I really don't think it will disappoint you.
Yeah, I will say my biggest complaint with this album is that, and this is more because of oversaturation, but I find myself mostly unimpressed with the lyricism here.
Yeah,
There's
definitely
there's
the most standard part of this band.
there's rarely a turn of phrase on this that really got me intrigued beyond the initial concept.
Yeah.
Comparing that to, say, Neurosis or Panopticon or even Boards of Canada, where the lyricism feels like a key part of the construction of the album
Hmm.
as a whole and its aesthetic framing. The lyrics themselves, though the performances are very good, don't really give me much to chew on. But I like the production on this a lot. I like the composition. I like the sludginess of it. And then you also have stuff like Capture and Release, which has the momentum comparable to something like the Converge album, which I really,
Mm,
really
mm.
appreciated hearing. But then you also have Strata in contrast, which brings the more melodic stuff that I usually latch onto more with albums like this. So I got a little bit of both in terms of what I've been enjoying out of metal this year, but this is probably my least favorite out of all of the names that I've just mentioned back to back in trying to communicate this point.
And you know what? Crazy
But it's
thing
still
is,
a very good record.
I'm Probably right there with you. All those albums that you named, I do think are like a cut above this one. And the crazy thing is, it's not because this one is lackluster. Like if this was any other year, I would be saying that this is a metal album of the year contender. But again, when I just came off the back of the heels of that Panopticon album, I can't quite say that, but I can turn a bunch of people over to a band that, if I'm perfectly honest, probably deserve an even bigger audience than they have. Like, they've held a pretty substantial following for, what kind of a band they are. Their production is very expensive sounding and has sounded that way for a little while now. But I think that this band definitely, like, if you're a little bit more old school, if you don't necessarily need polyrhythms and, Jordy Greep behind the microphone in your rock music, then I would definitely come over and, the water's warm, you might as well swim. And these are very familiar, but still very, very comfy waters. So,
Thumbs up.
thumbs up. Hell yeah. And now, man, this is
Oh,
weird.
wow.
This is very weird to talk about a new Boards of Canada album. We just have one. We just have one right here in front of us after 13 years. And honestly, it kind of feels like a little bit longer than that. Because, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Boards of Canada are the sort of, I don't want to say the fan favorite pick for like the big three of IDM, but they're kind of like, I see it like this in terms of this sort of genre's holy trinity. Aphex Twin is the artist that gets you into IDM. Autechre is the one that all of the crazy ass nerds really, really love. And then there's Boards of Canada, who are a little bit more for less the music engineering nerds and more for the music producing nerds. Because Boards of Canada have always been, in my mind anyway, on a bit of an island compared to their peers. Even though, I mean, I guess you could kind of argue that IDM sort of has the most disparate sort of flag flyers for its particular genre. And the label of IDM, intelligent dance music, is kind of a stupid one to begin with. That even the
Ugh.
people who make it
I
think
thought it
is
was, I didn't
dumb.
even realize that's what it was. I thought it was industrial.
Yeah, like you will hear everyone from Richard D. James himself be like, "That's fucking stupid. Don't call it that." So it's all just bullshit internet stuff. But regardless, Boards of Canada, they are a electronic music duo from Edinburgh, the United Kingdom. And ever since they showed up with their sort of debut in 1996, they have been an act to watch, and they've been an act that we've covered in the past. Their 2002 classic album, GeoGaddy, is one of my favorite albums of all time, one of Riley's favorite albums of all time. Perfect album, a sort of centerpiece when it comes to this particular brand of IDM, and an album that everyone who has seen the film Sinister has heard a song from, even though they don't know that they've heard a song from that album because they watched that movie. So that was actually how I was introduced to the band, and then I was introduced to their sort of seminal classic 1998's Music Has the Right to Children, a huge album in this scene, massive, like the fucking OK Computer of IDM, basically. I was introduced to that album because several songs of it were plagiarized on the Death Note soundtrack. So I have weirdly been associated with this band long before I got into music. So getting into Boards of Canada's music, especially seeing as it's about things like childhood and nostalgia and waning memories and stuff, it fit me like a glove. When I started listening to this band, it became a bona fide obsession. Like they were one of the bands where I downloaded every single thing they ever made, bootlegs and all, and I just couldn't stop listening to them. And I do similarly hold those first sort of run of Boards of Canada projects in very high esteem. Music Has the Right to Children is a classic in every sense of the word. GeoGaddy is as well, and I even prefer that album a little bit. I think that 2005's The Campfire Head Phase is a deeply overlooked album that is absolutely fantastic. And Tomorrow's Harvest, while far from my favorite release from the band, is still a worthwhile addition to their discography and kind of an interesting branch in between phases of this band. And kind of how their sound has gradually evolved, and it was a bit more of an ambient and sedate album, and I wouldn't really describe as the previous music this band have made as being ambient in nature, despite often being labeled as such. So, 13 years later, we now have Inferno, which was teased a little bit earlier this year and was put out by who else but Warp Records. And now we have this. And man, again, I just can't stress enough how, like, I just didn't think we would ever get another Boards of Canada album just because it didn't seem like something that was in the cards. They don't really have a social media presence. Their new music has not been teased in so long. And generally, they've always been a very cryptic band, a band about secret messages and codes and hiding things places. So even if they
Yeah, they were
were to
doing
come
some
out,
weird website stuff for this album, weren't they?
yeah, like there was some weird ARG stuff going on for this album, some like actual interesting stuff and not some bullshit Drake Iceman horse shit fucking hide my album in a glacier and get the police called on me type of bullshit. But regardless, when they do it, it's charming and interesting. And I was like, I don't know what a Boards of Canada album even looks like in the modern day because they're a band that feels so out of time that I'm just like listening to Music Has the Right to Children, for example. That doesn't feel like listening to an album from the 90s. It feels like listening to an album from a liminal dimension that exists in between parallel universes. It's just kind of so I'm like, what does that sound like today? And Inferno is interesting because what we have here is this down tempo IDM sort of psychedelia ambient synthwave mixture of a double record, essentially, a towering fucking 70-minute long album and a 10-minute long exclusive music video to cap it all off. And this has a little bit of everything, as double albums often do. In fact, you might even say that this is a double album masterpiece attempt by the band. And we are treading a lot of familiar ground when it comes to what this album is about and how the album is about it. Because Boards of Canada albums, you do kind of have to put a little bit of work into figuring out what they are about, because they're about warped audio. They're about sampling old commercials. They're about the weird ephemeral feeling that they can instill in you and make you think about things like, again, childhood with a different lens or a different perspective, and even kind of casting a lens onto it that makes you look at it with a darker or more updated perspective, combined with environmental disaster or ecological or infrastructural collapse is a big thing that they often talk about on albums like GeoGaddy. And on this album, with this sort of attempt at this album of two halves, at first I kind of interpreted this as multiple different ways that the world could end, kind of infringing on this sound. It felt like a multiple choice sort of answer to how is the world going to end? And then the more I listened to this, the more I was like, maybe that's not quite it. Maybe instead, with the sort of imagery, the sort of the topography, the cover, the title, Inferno. Maybe this is about an apocalypse that has already happened. Maybe this is about a post-apocalypse, actually. And then everything made just a little bit more sense. Every little bit of audio in this and everything, it all sort of came together for me. There's moments on here where you hear the sound of like I don't know, a father talking to their child and repeating a kind of religious mantra over and over again that slowly begins to be incorporated into the rhythm of the song. And when you have an idea like that, it's hard not to be like, oh, wow, that's actually like an attempt at a sort of narrative stab musically at exploring organized religion and how it makes your belief system kind of calcify into a system that you follow. And that kind of really intuitive sort of structuring is what Boards of Canada are all about. And that's what sort of led me to sort of continue my take on this album is that everything I heard from it just sort of emphasized that I kind of think this album is the most optimistic of all of the Boards of Canada releases because its stance seems to be everything is fucked and on fire and sucks and can only be rebuilt at this point. And I'm like, you know what? That's an interesting place for a Boards of Canada album to occupy in the current moment. So it does actually kind of feel like it is meeting the moment. But in terms of sound, what are we looking at here? Because Boards of Canada, I'm not sure, like, there's kind of a misnomer about the amount of their production that is analog versus digital and how long that sort of conflicting sort of binary has been at play. And I'm not gonna lie to you all, I don't care. Like when it comes to this kind of stuff, this is like listening to people complain about Dylan going electric to me, where it's like, guys, we've already moved on. Like, I don't really understand why rehashing this debate is even here anymore. Like, there's nothing useful that can come from that discussion. And I also think it's really short-sighted and dumb. Like, it's just kind of like, yeah, electronic musicians using computers to make their music. Fucking crazy, right? Check out Autechre sometime. I don't know. But like they're kind of the opposite of Autechre in that regard, in that they sound like a band who are made with physical knobs that you twisted to make these sounds. Whereas Autechre are literally like, we have made our own software to design our own digital instruments to make our music, to make it alien. So it's like Boards of Canada in a weird way are like the most human of these very non-human bands and assimilating sounds in the way that they do with like found sound and just sampling and everything. It feels close to home in a way that some other bands like this simply do not. It has a tangible texture to it. But now these guys are a little bit more hi-fi. Like this is an album that does sound noticeably more expensive than the previous records and what they were trying to do. And again, I just kind of view it as a lateral move. I don't really feel a type of way about it at all because I think they've done a great job at maintaining the physicality of their sound and not losing the presence of the instrumentation. The balance here I think is very well nailed, and don't feel like I'm missing anything. Like the texture is different, but the body of the sound is the same. I don't feel like there is a step down when it comes to ideas or aesthetics on here. But then you take a look at this album, and boy, howdy, is this a double album in that it is an album of two halves to me. Because the first half of this is, and I say this very, very nicely, a Boards of Canada album, in that it is basically everything I expected a new Boards of Canada album to be, in all of the good and maybe even bad things that that can imply. And then the second half of this album rolls around, and it's like, oh, there's the guys I remember. Because the back half of this, I will not lie, hits a certain stride at a certain point where I was like, oh, this is some of the best music these guys have made in like a while. This isn't just good for guys coming back. This is very good. So while inconsistent and while sonically this album has some far-reaching differences on these two halves, I gotta say, I am delightfully here to report that I was still impressed by the New Boards of Canada album. And I was worried that, maybe the magic wouldn't be there. Maybe there was no, waters left to chart in this band's sound. But no, if anything, I think these guys have proven that if this isn't the last that we hear from them, there is still, undiscovered country. So, Jen, you don't really strike me as like a IDM head.
But
And
I
I mean that
mean,
in that you're probably one of the lesser pretentious people I have in my circle.
well, I mean, I'm the number one fan of Ethel Cain's Perverts.
That's
So
true. That's true.
this this album is directly in that area for me.
Oh
This
yeah.
album this
Oh,
album squares the circle of stuff like Perverts and even stuff like GR
yeah. Yeah.
very well.
Oh yeah.
I was thinking a lot about GR while listening to this album.
I bet you
Um,
did.
because the concept of this kind of post-apocalypse being explored through all these different conspiracy theories that are being conveyed through these found recordings, that's immediately just very cool to me. Like that's a
Very
cool,
Jen idea.
it's a
Yeah.
cool idea for an archival project
Yeah.
that can also serve as a kind of artistic statement.
I have very good news for you about this band's discography because if you found that specifically compelling about this, congratulations. The whole discography's like that.
Because I've just loved like being on Google while listening to this album and
Yeah.
learning about new weird
The
things from
true
trying to
2000s kid experience is being on Google listening to a Boards of Canada album. Yes, exactly. That's so true.
But I was just looking at like, huh, why is it 1420 megahertz? What's that about? Like I
Yeah.
just from the basics, I was able to look at so many of the labeling choices and think like, okay, where is this going? Or I hear a new sample and I try to track it down and I'm like, okay, what does the presence of this contribute to the overall whole picture of the collage, if you will, even. And I fucking love this album so
It's
much.
so
This
good.
is this is awesome. So, what you're getting here is again this kind of multiple interpretation of the specters of change, whether that's cults, ancient gods, natural disasters, or just the natural passage of time. All these things being explored through these samples and through these Vangelis synths and
Oh,
these shuggy, really fast drums. And I think
yeah.
maybe my favorite piece on this, Blood in the Labyrinth, is my
God,
favorite song on
fuck
this.
yes. This is my favorite too.
I
Oh,
I loved the
God.
use of the sitar
Mm.
with the raucous drum and bass. And I loved so I've seen this. I've seen the movie that they took these interviews from. It's called Angel Death. It was
Ooh.
it was a I believe it was a newscast actually interviewing people that got strung out on angel dust back in the 70s. And so I loved the way that that was incorporated on this song because you have this
Oh.
one guy just talking about being really high and just feeling all these violent impulses of just like wanting to go out and get in a fight and kill someone, kill
He
another
sounded like he
human
was ready
being.
for the purge.
Yeah. And then it cuts and we go to this other segment and it's this woman talking about how she just like couldn't bring herself to help as she watched her friend drown after falling into a body of water.
Proper nightmare shit.
Proper nightmare stuff. And that leads very well into where for me, I think this album makes its big shift. For me, this isn't so much an album of halves as much as it is the first third, and then the word becomes flesh into the magic land and blood in the labyrinth as this kind of elongated second act, and then
Mm.
everything after that as this kind of third act, where with deep time, this
Yeah.
instrumental cut, where deep time also this really interesting concept about looking at time through astronomical scale, thinking about the effect of millions and billions of years passing on at a time.
Billions and billions, said
Billions and
Carl
billions.
Sagan.
Which leads into this Aleister Crowley excerpt that's being read about this great war to issue in this new era of individualism, which ties into because Aleister Crowley saw World War One as like the culmination of that vision that he was talking about, which is just terrifying to
Yep.
hear the things that somebody like this describes and just go, yeah, this real thing that just happened. That's what I wanted.
And things got worse after that. So skew that in your head.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like,
yeah. Where even
oh, fun.
Aleister Crowley in retrospect was like, yeah, even I didn't think it was gonna get that crazy.
It's like, shit, man, 1945 was rough, huh?
And then Arena Americanada. I really
Mm.
love the song construction on this. It reminds me of that song Antonio from The Guest that they're playing in the scene where he's in the maze of the haunted
Yeah,
house. These
yeah.
big
Oh,
bright
that's a good song
synths and
too.
the Julie Cruz type vocalist happening there. This song reminded me a lot of that song from the
Yep.
movie The Guest, which is just a real quick way to earn your favor with me is remind me of a song from the Guest soundtrack.
It's a
And
good
I
fucking
love
soundtrack.
the way that this album ends on this moment of rebirth. I feel like is this really great, hopeful moment for the Inferno concept to end on because we have had that a lot with these metal apocalypse albums that we've been talking about on the
Yeah.
show lately. But this one, I think this is going to sound weird. In getting very didactic about it being a moment of rebirth, it communicates itself more effectively sonically than any of those other records that we've been talking about have been able to do.
Yeah.
Because you think about I Saw Through Platonia after a song like The Word Becomes Flesh, where I
Yeah.
think a recurring theme on this album is literal biblical interpretation
Yes.
is a big thing on this record. Biblical textualism, if you will, because
Religious apocrypha.
you have the song Father and Son, which is taking audio from this back and forth between this cult member and his father, who the whole thing with it was called the Children of God, and their recruitment tactic was to just quote Matthew 10:36 at people until they broke and took it so literally that they would isolate themselves from their entire social circle as a testament to God, which made them materially reliant on the leader of the cult, and that was where he came in and did his whole thing. And so all throughout Father and Son, you have this dialogue of like, well, I love God too much to like situate anybody else in a way that they could be more important to me than God. But it's like, well, but you can't like love God and also like be with your family and have the life that we tried to build for you? And it's like, no. The answer is no. And it's this big impasse of the literal interpretation. And then again, on the literal interpretation, you've got the word becomes flesh, which is this reading of scientific text that is just facts about the early stages of embryonic conception,
Yep.
but when you take that so literally, this thing kind of happens in reverse, right? Where you
Yes.
take the process of life coming into being and you extract that into what the album is talking about, which is that, yeah, this is the moment where the album is shifting into being about how a new world is born out of the post-apocalypse, which is why we have to think about stuff like creationism and deep time and millions of years passing before a single like speck of hope can come into reality. And then the process, another one of my favorite tracks on here,
Fantastic.
which is just sonically trying to capture the feeling of being born,
Mm-hmm.
which is just an insane concept and one that can very easily get very silly. Like I think Father and
Yeah.
Son gets to a point where it sounds very silly because they're chopping and screwing the samples to make it fit with the melody in a way that makes it sound almost like a rap battle.
Oh yeah, like there is an element to Boards of Canada's sound that has always been there that lays into like the idea of kitsch. Like
It's
just kind of
playful.
like
Yeah, I shouldn't say
hmm
silly, it's playful.
hmm No, definitely. I definitely still see it. It's like they lean into that, and even stuff that's like intentionally a bit tacky sounding. And honestly, it's kind of why I love so much of their production is because they use like synth tones and stuff that like no other artist alive would use. Like they use like presets in their music in a way that feels both like really innocent in how it's like, oh, like a child could have made that sound, but they're fitting it into a structure that only could arise from some kind of intelligent musician design. And I think that that really shows through on an album like this, is that they have not lost their touch when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, and the melodic construction really reflects that playfulness.
Hmm.
There's a lack of short-term rhythm on this. There's not a lot of
Yeah. Yeah.
arpeggio, there's not a lot of riffs. It's very long, drawn out chords or, hard-hitting drums or staccato notes but playing the same note on this
Hmm.
album. And that monotony in those elements of its construction really contribute greatly to the grand design of this concept. And so I was really invigorated by being able to really get deep in the weeds of an album like this, whereas normally
Yeah.
that kind of colossal sound construction just kind of repels me from going deeper because I'm just like, well, it's just gonna sound like this for a few minutes, and that's cool, but like, what am I getting here? But the way that all of those sequences are juxtaposed and the way that the sound collage is able to segue different ideas through the soundscape makes its monotony more intriguing to investigate at face value, which is really, really good for somebody like me who likes to get a little bit more heady about song construction and things like that. So I got really, really, really into this. I'm a big fan.
Really glad that happened, just because that's like the ideal experience, the platonic idea of what you want a new Boards of Canada album to be. It feels like a little moment where you get to unravel a series of little riddles and get to explore something. And so like I have really valued just the novelty of just getting to hear new Boards of Canada music. But I do actually, I mean, I think this album is like really rather special. Like I think that the first sort of proper piece on here, Prophecy at 1420 megahertz, is just fucking great. Like classic Boards of Canada sort of song structure with this really sort of repetitive psychedelic loop that I just love. And honestly, I love how hard this album leans into psychedelia. Those are some of my favorite sort of prior moments of this band's sound, and like them laying into production techniques like the sort of deep wallowing reverb that's on a song like this. It just adds a lot of depth to this sound that I really, really love. And after Prophecy at 1420, there is a bit more of a low-key stretch in the form of Hydrogen, Helium, Lithium, Leviathan, and Age of Capricorn. Father and Son, too, is kind of on the more sort of like low-key side. It's not until Naraka where we pick back up and the album starts doing something that you just have actively not heard Boards of Canada do before. Because everything that came before this at this point, while like good, foundationally solid, I think is exemplary work for what it is still not anything like new necessarily. But Naraka is like danceable. This is so strange. Like there's an almost EDM bent to this song's structure and size and groove again. Like it really does feel like I kind of think you nailed it in that this is like the Boards of Canada album where not where percussion matters the least, because that's definitely Tomorrow's Harvest, but it's where percussion feels like the most actively de-emphasized from what their sound originally was. And that's what I love about them. Like if you go listen to our GeoGaddy review, which is somehow one of our most popular videos on this channel, okay. If you go listen to me talk about
They
that,
all saw Elijah Wood quote Riley's post about weird IDM niche subgenres back
yeah.
in the day.
Oh God, that what a moment for us as a
Shout out to
as a
Elijah
people.
Wood.
Shout out to Elijah Wood. Thank you for that a couple of years ago. But it's like this album. it doesn't necessarily have the same textural production flourishes when it comes to percussion specifically that I look for in this band. And the fact that it doesn't necessarily have that as strongly pronounced of an element, and I still really love this album, is kind of a testament to how great of a band they are, is because this is like taking Neil Peart out of Rush and then being like, here's Rush and here's a Rush album. It's like, I don't really know about that, guys. But no, honestly, they are able to dexterously handle the fact that they are leaning into something new, something different. And on Naraka, that's what I feel. Something new, something different, something more active and pulsating and weird. It's like this feels like an analog spin on the kind of stuff that Burial was making back on Untrue. And like that's fucking fascinating. Like this is the closest I feel like those two bands have ever been comparable before. And again, I'm a big Burial head. And so once we get to The Word Became Flesh, though, this album just hits a fucking stride. Word Becomes Flesh, Into the Magic Land, Blood in the Labyrinth, Deep Time, All Reason to Parts, Arena Americanata, The Process, and the You Retreat in Time and Space is just a near flawless run of music, if I'm honest. Like, just the exact kind of depthful production that I want from this band. And particularly on songs like The Process that it doesn't seem like people are even latching on to really strongly. I just love the ambiance of a track like this. There's so much careful layering when it comes to just some of the synth tones on here. And Blood in the Labyrinth, man, oh God, it's minimal. It's not even one of the biggest moments on the album, but it feels like one of the most vivid, like one of the most like it feels like it evokes this almost hostile architecture, and it evokes like liminal spaces. And that's kind of what I love about Boards of Canada, is that they always have evoked liminal spaces to me. Kind of on topic, as the Backrooms movie has come out and kind of taken over the world,
Oh
like
man,
Boards.
no, I just saw that last night. So
Oh
this has
yeah.
been rolling.
So, like, you get it when I'm saying that,
Yeah.
to me, Boards of Canada have always been the soundtrack to the back rooms to me. Like that's exactly like as an aesthetic overlay of like old digital and analog equipment combining together to create something new and interesting with a really unique aesthetic. And
Thing is, you're gonna love the soundscape of that movie.
yes, I'm kind of like tepidly sort of really excited for that movie because I really love that sort of liminal space kind of like horror stuff, and I just love that like
No
imagery and
matter,
stuff.
I'll tell you this, no matter your feelings on the story, you and I have very similar opinions on like what we like about production design and sound design. It's a feast.
I've
So
heard from even people who disliked it have told me that the production design is fucking awesome. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I will go see it on that merit alone. That's like totally, absolutely. And just the novelty of the fact that a fucking teenage YouTuber beat a Star Wars movie in opening box office gross. Hell yeah, Kane Parsons. Good for you, man. You too, Curry Barker. Fucking get those laurels, Kings. But to circle back around to Boards of Canada, I do think the second half of this album is sensational. And I also think it is a good deal more cohesive than the first. But here's the thing, is that this is a massive double album. I've not gotten to listen to this nearly as much as I'm going to listen to it throughout the course of this year. So I would say that my feelings and rating for this album right now is my floor with this album. I've gotten my footing. I know what I like about it, and I know some of the things that trip me up a little bit. But the thing is, with every Boards of Canada album, you kind of got to live with it a little bit. Like I was kind of that way with Music as the Right to Children. I was like, okay, this is an interesting album when I first heard it, and then at like the 50th listen, I was like, okay, maybe they're onto something here. But, this is a big album. It's a big album. It's a dense album. It's a challenging one. And I do think that its sort of structural wonkiness is intentional. And I think that, like, most elements of Boards of Canada's album structure and when it comes to everything, like, if you saw our episode on GeoGaddy and how we sort of went the rundown of talking about how that album was constructed and how everything down to its fucking total runtime is basically a tiny little coded message that's used by the band. Like everything about their design is intentional to some extent. Like that's why I feel like an album took this long to materialize from them, is because the expectations are so high that they know they have to make this as good of a version as you possibly can. This is the music equivalent of Hollow Knight's Silk Song for most people. So if you've been wondering why all of your elder zillennial friends have been losing their mind over this album for the past week, that's probably why. So I think this is a terrific album, but I'm also nowhere near done with it. And I want to see how the parts of it that don't immediately click with me grow with me in the future. Because again, there's a lot of really admirable and really interesting stuff on that first half, but wow, that second half, man, it really feels like uncharted territory for the band. It feels spacious, but without feeling empty, like Tomorrow's Harvest could often kind of feel like. There are just moments where the composition wasn't quite there because of the ambient and more sedate nature of the album, which was in keeping with its kind of post-apocalyptic concept, but it didn't make for a more interesting record. Inferno, on the other hand, kind of corrects it and steers it in the other direction of being an album that uses its concept to make it more musically interesting rather than less musically interesting, which is why I think that this is a definitive step up from where the band were previously, even though I don't think that they have ever like released something that is on the whole disappointing or even mid. But yeah, this is a very worthwhile addition to one of the best discographies in all of music. And I feel like that is not a small feat. It may not change your life or anything, and it may be weird to get your head around, but that's kind of part of the magic, is that I like having an album that I know I'm be like, I'm gonna marinate with this. I'm gonna break out the wine later in like a month and take an edible and put this on and be like, ooh, yeah, music. Because I'm
Birds of
almost in my
Canada.
30s and that's just what I do now.
Boards of a Canada, indeed.
Boards of a Canada in fucking deed. Wow, throwing it back. And speaking of throwing it back, if you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like, give us a comment, tell us what you've been listening to in the comments below, tell us what you would like to hear us talk about in the future, should you desire it. And as always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, IMAX, think big. This is how I found out that IMAX has a slogan. I didn't think they did.
I had
I
no
didn't think
idea.
they were like a business. I just thought it was like a thing.